Hello, family. It's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing trainings across the country. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today I'm excited to welcome to the show a powerful man of God, Andrew Singleton III. We call him Drew, Pastor Drew. And he is an executive pastor at Victory Apostolic Church in Madison, and where he has been there for how many years, Drew? We'll find out. He's been there a long time. But he has his BA in business, his master's in business, and he's currently pursuing his MDiv. He is a lover of golf, so you can always find him at a local golf course near you. And he's a happily married man of beautiful Dominique of over 18 years, where they have three beautiful girls who they love dearly. And I'm so excited to have him on the show with us today to share his testimony. And you are going to be blessed by our time together. And so thank you so much, Pastor Drew, for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great joy.
Yeah, yeah. I had to have you, Drew. I mean, you,
Appreciate it.
you have a powerful testimony to share that I think will help others to find freedom and healing. And so I wanted you to share your story. So let's start with that.
I have a very similar story that unfortunately a lot of people have with I bring it down a little. So I was molested at a young age. Typically, our parents back then trusted us to spend the night at times at other people's homes. So a house that I was very familiar with, that I stayed with all the time. At the age of 7, my innocence was taken away. I'll just leave it at that. Uh, at the time that it happened, still remember everything very vividly. 2 in the morning, I got up, and after it happened, the person went back to sleep as if nothing happened. I got up and called my house, and my father picked up, and I was crying, trying to explain to the best of my ability what just happened at the age of 7. So I just remember sitting in the living room of the house that I was at. He was like, "I'll be on my way." He ended up getting there around 6. I was confused why he didn't come right away. I was 7. That's still confusing now, actually. But either way, he gets there at 6. We go to breakfast, we talk, and he goes back to the home and addresses the adult that I was making the accusation with, or that I had the experience with. It wasn't an accusation; it really happened. At that time, I felt that he handled it. My father's my superhero. If he said he handled it, he had the conversation, I was done with it. And I was also 7. So, of course, I don't really understand the magnitude of what just happened. So, as I began to just get older, at the age, so I'm going to break this down at different age levels where the event kept coming back. So by the time that I was 13, my father was about to start Victory Apostolic Church. So we started off in Harvey, moved to Chicago Heights, and now we're in Madison. So we're in our 29th year of ministry. God is good. So at the age of 13, I started going through puberty, and I learned through puberty that my Bible, it misses things, and then I finally realized what actually happened to me on that night. Um, I thought about telling my father, and hoping that he would reassess what happened and go have that conversation again. And I've always been an overthinker. I've always been a carer of other people. I've always been, what, I'm actually am okay. So I left it alone because the church was about to start. I'm like, you know what, I'm doing fine. Took one for the team. So I let it go. In my brain, it really wasn't impacting me. I went through high school. I actually graduated high school a virgin still. So not that that means anything, but to me, it meant something. So it still hadn't impacted me in a way that I felt that it would. At the age of 18 is where I had another tough moment. So obviously, I'm about to go to college. My father takes me to a restaurant. He always takes me to a restaurant. He likes to eat and talk. So he takes me to a restaurant on my way to college, like any father would do with their son. Has the the birds and the bees talk, and we're going back and forth about everything. And right then and there, something told me to tell him right now what happened at 7, because it's no way possible that my father handled it that way, knowing the full magnitude of what happened. And because I was about to go away to school, I felt that it would, once again, thinking about his feelings, going to be leaving him. What sense would it make for me to tell him something this traumatizing and then go to school the very next weekend? So I left it alone, swept it under the rug again. The church was in a huge growth spurt. Um, I left it alone, caring about everything else that was going on. So, first 2 years of college did not go well. Now, grade wise, Excel, National Honor Society, all of that stuff. But as far as righteous living, the trauma finally has started to make its way through unhealthy relationships with young ladies. Not going to take you through the details of the first 2 years of college. A lot of bad decisions, a lot of bad judgment, a lot of bad scenarios that did not have to happen. And that is where I actually started understanding that there's something that needs to be addressed. So by the time I hit 20, I'm living off campus. After a night of inappropriate behavior with a young lady, I go into the bathroom to use it. And as I'm washing my hands, I look in the mirror and I see this like evil and devilish face. I didn't recognize me. And God was like, if you don't want the rest of your life to look like this, go get some help. So if I could be real, before that moment, I honestly did not feel responsible for my actions because I felt like God should have stopped what happened. You know, remember, I'm even though I've been in church my whole life, I'm an extremely immature saint at this point. I felt God owed me multiple things. I felt that since you allowed it, then you knew I was going to end up going down this road. And if I could just be honest, at times I was just mad at God. So I didn't open the Bible in college. Lost. I wouldn't say I lost my faith because I wasn't all the way out there. Satan didn't have a lot of things to tempt me with because he had me with women. So no, I wasn't a cursor. I wasn't a go to parties. I've never used drugs. I've never been drunk. But as I tell my story, I'm like Satan had no reason to tempt me with anything else because he had my mind from that unhealed trauma that happened at the age of 7. So to me, by the time I hit 20 and did not go get help, I have now felt responsible for every single decision after that. So fast forward, I graduate with honors. Come back to the church, get involved, not really being bothered. I did kind of pull it together. The last year of college, I had the same girlfriend. We broke up right before I graduated. We were at different ages, so she still had a few more years to go. So we separated, and then I started dating again. Still, really no big issues. I'm actually living pretty decent as a Christian. And by the time I meet my beautiful wife, Dominique, dating goes well. We get engaged. And right before we get married, I'm 24 now. The Holy Spirit spoke to me again and said, you need to let her know the full magnitude of what happened because she didn't know anything. And I immediately went into, I can't tell her that because if she knows what I went through with that man, she's going to think I'm gay and she's not going to marry me and I'm going to miss out on the love of my life. Of course, that makes absolutely no sense because even when I was doing what I was doing in college, I felt that I had to prove to these young ladies that I wasn't gay because I felt they knew what happened to me. How would they even know what happened to me? I never told anybody that, but that's what happens when Satan isolates you. He makes you think that you are the only one going through what you went through, which means that nobody can understand what you're going through, which means that you deal with it internally and whatever that looks like, which is a very unhealthy way to deal with things. So we get married, life's fine to a certain degree, and I started making bad decisions within my marriage because of the unresolved trauma. Long story short, by the time I turned 32, I have my first child. And at that moment, all of the feelings of age 7 came roaring back because now that I have a daughter, she's 10 now, knowing what happened to me, I immediately was like, if someone did that to my daughter, it's going to be hell to pay. So I immediately went into a position of I do not like my parents. They did not. They failed to protect me. It's no way possible they handled that situation the proper way. So that is the next time where I have this big event and I realize you need to go get some help before you end up messing up your wife and messing up your daughter. Now, we have 3 kids now. But so at that moment, I got deeper in Christ. Should have been doing this the whole time. I got deeper in my relationship with Jesus. I started preaching more. I started teaching more, and things were going great. And what happened was when I started working on my MDiv, um, it took a turn for the worse. So I ended up being in a senior pastor's class. They actually accidentally enrolled me into a class for senior pastors. So it was like 25 of us. And after 2 weeks, I'm just like, I don't think I'm supposed to be in here. So I called the registrar's office and they're like, hey, in your bio, it says you have 1,500 youth. If we add up all of the pastors' congregations on this call, it doesn't even equal 1,500. So we're just going to let you stay. Now, between me and you, I was like, y'all just don't want to refund that money that I paid for that class. So I went through the next 2 weeks, and did the class start making sense since they okayed me to be in it? No, it still didn't make sense. My brain was, why am I now? I still passed the class, still got an A in the class actually, but I was just like, I don't think I'm supposed to be in here. This is weird. They're giving all these testimonies about how they've helped members, and I'm just like, so week 5 hits, and my professor makes one of the boldest statements. I don't know if I have it correct, but he says, unresolved trauma, unresolved sin, if you keep them that way, you will never reach your full potential in God and as a senior leader. And that's where the light bulb went off. So even though it appeared that I was in this class by accident, hearing those words is actually what started the healing process. So I don't know if
Mm.
you want me to keep going or if you want to interject at this point.
No, this is great. This so it seems like God was speaking to you all along the way,
He
little
was.
nuggets.
He was. And it reminded me of the story of can I talk about the Bible?
Yeah,
Okay.
go.
It
Absolutely.
reminded me of the story of Joseph, all throughout the story of Joseph that he went through with his brothers and almost being killed. They faked like they killed him, thrown in the pit, sold into slavery, ended up at Potiphar's house. Uh, Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, didn't work. She lies on him. He ends up in jail. Everything that Joseph went through, if we read those scriptures, it always said, "But the Lord was with Joseph." At that moment, I honestly look back on my life and I was like, even though I know I've been through some stuff, in my opinion, at age 7, that was unmerited trauma. Unfortunately, because it was unresolved, I caused a bunch of merited trauma on my own.
Wow. Can you repeat that?
Even though what happened to me at the age of 7 was unmerited trauma, it had nothing to do with it. Tried to stop it, I could not stop it. After that, because I did not get healing, I ended up causing merited trauma that was my fault. I could not blame anybody for that. So, what happened was after that, I ended up going to therapy. So, I got into a moment in the bathroom again, and God said, if you don't get help now, I will use somebody else. Now, fast forward to today, I understood what he meant by that. Back then, I still didn't understand what he meant by that because I didn't have a call to a senior pastor. I didn't. So I was like, I was scared either way. I've always feared God. I've always respected God. So at that moment, I actually asked the professor, who was also senior pastor and a counselor, uh, to give me therapy. I also went to a female therapist. The counselor was a white man. I went to a black woman, and I also had a black man. I wanted to get as many different perspectives as possible. So as I went through all of that trauma, life did not get better right away. The healing part of trauma is why a lot of people really don't want to go because they know that band-aids are going to be ripped off. Now, I ripped off multiple band-aids with all 3 of those counselors, hurt every time, cried every time because I had to keep reliving that moment that happened at age 7. And the thing with a horrific event of trauma, the PTSD of it allows you to vividly see what happened play by play. I really don't. I have faint memories of it now because I've been healed. But back then, I could legit tell you every single detail. I'm sitting in counseling. I don't want to get into the details of two of the two African American therapists because they're actually at the church that I go to. But I will get into the details of the the white teacher. Um, he told me after I explained everything to him, there is no possible way. The way you admire your dad, how you speak highly of your dad, it's no possible way he knows the full details of that story. And I looked him dead in the face. I was like, he does know. He told me he handled it. You know, I'm done with it. He's my superhero. That was it. That was it. And even though he lost that cape when I had a child, I still kind of viewed him as a superhero. He was still overall, even if he did drop the ball on this, overall he's been a great father. Especially if you compare him to how our society views black men as fathers. So his homework for me was you need to go tell your wife, your father, and your mother the details. So of course everybody knows this wasn't a fun process. I even told him like I don't think my father needs to know the details. It's none of his business. I'm doing better now. I'm getting therapy. And he said, "Do you want to be healed and do you want to be whole?" And I said, "Well, of course, that's why I'm talking to you." He was like, "I can't make you do it, but I would advise that you do it." So I made an appointment with my father. Yes, even though he's the senior pastor at the church that I go to, I still have to make appointments. And I told him what happened, and within the first 5 minutes, it was clear that he did not know the exact details of what happened. So as I'm explaining them to him, I mean, I saw every emotion that I wish that I would have saw on that day when I was 7. Anger, hurt, tears. My father is not an emotional guy. I don't know what it is about their age range that they're not supposed to show emotion. It is what it is. But this is one of the probably I could count on one hand the number of times he's cried. That this was probably number 4, and I'll be 42 this year. He doesn't do it that often. But as he's crying and going through emotion, it took us 2 weeks to filter through this whole story because the two of us was having a hard time getting through it. The issue was that now that he's finally reacted the way that I felt he should react, I'm back emotional because now I'm like, man, I've been mad at him since I was 32. Now I feel stupid. You know, I feel horrible. He didn't know. Um, so after him and I filtered through it, I went to my mother. Mother the same way. I mean, when I say anger as a mom, she looked like she wanted to kill the person. Thankfully, at this time, the person had actually passed away because if he didn't, I think he would have still passed away.
You've been dead. Yeah.
She immediately went back to me being 7, and that's what my father said. I'm like, well, why were you so emotional? He said, as you said that out your mouth, I saw you at that restaurant sitting across from the table with me as a 7-year old. And for the first time in my life, I'm watching my parents react to what happened to me. Remember, I was thinking they knew everything. It turned out the person lied. So as I'm explaining to them detail step by step what happened, they're showing their emotions. Starting the counsel was 100% right, and then now the time came to go talk with my wife about what happened. Obviously, our own emotions in our marriage. Why did you feel you couldn't trust me to tell me that? Why did you feel like I would leave you? I had no answers. I really didn't. And that's what Satan does. Satan wants you to live in confusion. When you live in confusion, your mind is not stayed on God. And our job as Christians is to keep our mind stayed on Christ. If it stayed in confusion, God doesn't exist in confusion. That's why God created with intent. The world was without form and void. He created order before he started creating. So, because my brain wasn't functioning properly, nothing made sense. So as I'm going through this process, unfortunately, a lot of bad decisions have been made all throughout that time span, which a lot of people have made. So the healing finally comes about a year and a half to 2 years later. I feel whole. God led me to preach a message at the end of that 2 years that, from what I was told, uh, helped a lot of people. You know, you don't hear a lot over the pulpit about trauma. Even in that message, I talked about the horrible decisions I made. Um, as a Christian. You don't hear pastors talk about their sins a lot. I talked about mine. People need to understand that at times we fail. And the reason is not that I want to get up there and tell them every time I fail, because that's not the case. Not that I'm living a perfect life. I'm living a way better, much holier life, but nobody's perfect. But I had to let them know what happens if you go unresolved with whatever trauma that happened in your life. And I'm here to say that even if you felt the trauma was unmerited or you caused the trauma yourself, your keys to your future is to go get help. Now, I know this is a faith based organization. So, of course, my help did start first going to God and trying to follow God's instruction of what do I do next? He led me to therapy finally. And through that therapy, in my opinion, I have reached a whole new level, a whole new mindset in life. And if you want to shift where you're at right now in life, you have to shift your mindset. You have to get to this point of living in reality. The trauma happened. There's nothing you could do to go back in the past and stop it. For years, I used to think, man, what could I have done to stop it? I blame me. I should have just got up and ran up the stairs. And for years, I blamed me. I blamed my little old 7-year-old self. And that was so unfair. If you want to do your future self justice, get healing from your past. You will, as my teacher said, you will never be fully used by God, and you will never be fully whole until you're able to forgive what happened in the past and move on, whether it's through both God, therapy, loved ones helping you through it. I think all of this is needed, but in my opinion, the most important is God, and the next most important is therapy. I am a preacher that preaches therapy. I preach go see God and then go sit on somebody's couch and go get some help. There is nothing weak about you if you're going to get help for something that happened in the past. Actually, the strong people are defined as people that are recognizing where they're weak, where they've been hurt, where they've been damaged, where they've been abused, where they've been used. The people that understand and recognize that reality and then go get help are able to go into a new reality where God has always called us to be in. So that is pretty much that's the whole story. I spared a lot of details because I don't think they're important. If you do want to hear more details, I preached about a 40-minute sermon.
I would love to share this in the show notes so people can check it out.
You can. And what I did is I compared the story of Job. Normally when we hear the story of Job in the Bible, he lost his wealth, his family, his health diminished. And everybody talks about, yeah, but God gave him double for his trouble. So I decided to preach a sermon that actually talked about what people don't talk about with the story of Job. It's the trauma that Job went through losing all of that stuff. Job was traumatized. He lost all 10 of his kids. He was the wealthiest man at that time, lost everything. He lost the respect of his wife and ended up losing his wife. There are a lot of theories of what happened to her. I do believe that she passed away because it appears that he married someone else. But he lost everything, even his health. God allowed Satan to touch his health. And what I finally came to the realization, remember, I'm 7 years through, almost 7 years now being healed. God allowed that unmerited trauma to happen so I can help people. And that is where finally reached the spiritual maturity. I kind of reached it in the middle of that message because that wasn't in my notes to say that. But God allowed me to go through that because He knew that I could not only get through it, but He knew this testimony will help and release so many people from a past that they're not proud of, whether they caused it or whether God allowed it. God doesn't cause that. God allowed it. He, for whatever reason, He removed His hedge of protection under over me at 7, just like He removed the hedge of protection from Job at the time Job went through all of his trauma.
But that's powerful, Drew. And so my hearing your testimony and just being incredibly blessed by it. I guess if I were to ask you one more question, it would be, what is healing like for you? You said you're at a place where you experience healing. What is healing like for you?
Healing is beautiful. I feel like I have my life back. And even though at the time that I after the time in between the traumatic event and I guess I would say I was fully healed by 38. I don't know what fully healed means, but that's where I felt like it wasn't impacting me anymore. Between that time, even though I didn't know I had lost my life, I had lost a lot. I missed out on a lot of times. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of depression. I had a lot of why me. I had a lot of moments where I was in and out of my relationship with God. Because when I would have these big remembrance of the event, I would be like, "How could you? I'm your child. How could you let me go through this?" And because I felt my parents allowed me to go through this without really trying to help me, in my opinion, that was wrong. As I said, I felt alone. I felt like no one has ever went through this, and then just the fear of being judged. Uh, a typical man is not going to talk about a sexual encounter with another man. So the thing that I feel that has brought that has resulted in my healing is freedom. We just left Black History Month. Even though I was still, and here's another thing: when you're going through these unhealed traumatic experience, please recognize that the fact that you are living, God is still blessing you during that time. He's still giving us unmerited favor. He's still giving us undeserved blessings. His grace and mercy is still on our lives. Even though it doesn't feel like it at times, if you can make the decision to think about how wrong God was, He's actually blessed you with the right mind. It's wrong mindset, but you have a mind that works. You had a mouth that works. You're still breathing. So God is still blessing us during that time. But by the time you get over the heel of that, whatever that past trauma was, you're free. I felt chains breaking. I felt like I was living in bondage. I couldn't be myself with people. I was always nervous around my father and mother because if they brought something up like that and it triggered me, I felt like I would blow up at them. And I did. I had a bunch of blow ups with my father when we will be talking and dealing with church work and things like that. I was the youth pastor since I was 27 through the age of 41. So, in my opinion, I've done a great job as a youth pastor here. But there were times when we had heated discussions about bad decision making. And even as we're talking, and as my boss, he can't speak to me if I've made a bad decision. But I would be like, oh, now you want to get loud. You ain't get loud with such and such when he did such and such to me. So it actually caused a lot of inappropriate feelings towards my family also. Um, it hurt and it was an unhealthy place to be in. So the other result of that is I feel healthy. We want to feel healthy mind, body, and soul. I've never felt like I lost my Christianity. Did I make bad decisions during my walk? Yep, I made a bunch of bad decisions, just like a bunch of the characters in the Bible have made bad decisions, and just like a bunch of you guys have made bad decisions in your Christian walk. I don't care what your pastor says or doesn't say, they too have made a bunch of bad decisions during their Christian walk. I don't know who defines what's a big mess up, what's a small mess up. To God, they're mess ups. And that's how I have to live through this thing. The goal of me is to have very limited mess ups and to learn my lessons and not re experience the same mess ups because I am still a sinner saved by grace. And I recognize that I could still put myself in bad decisions that I should not have put myself in. So I'm trying to make sure that through the healing of this trauma that I went through, that the control that I have is on the front end of every decision that I make. Once you make the decision, you lose control. Once you make a choice, you no longer have control of the consequences of those choices. And it's something about being unresolved with your therapy that makes you not even think about the consequences of the choices that you're making. But when you become healed, the first thing that comes to your mind, if A and B happens, what will happen on this other side? And what I did for almost 30 years is I ended up causing trauma to other people that had nothing to do with my original trauma. And that's the place where I believe the quote is if you don't get healing from your trauma, you'll end up bleeding on people that didn't cause your trauma. And I can that is one of the truest things that I've ever heard in my life. And I ended up making decisions that impacted other people that had no relation to what happened. I didn't even know my wife existed at the age of 7. I didn't know my parents didn't know the whole story at the age of 7. I didn't know my sisters didn't know that story at the age of 7. I didn't even know I was going to have kids at the age of 7. But because I went unresolved for so long, all of these people now end up being impacted from the bad choices that I made because of the unresolved trauma.
And that is real, Pastor Drew. And I know someone who's listening right now recognizes that they traumatized some other people in their life because of the same situation of them experience trauma of some sort. And they might be struggling with accepting God's forgiveness, reconciling that. They might have a lot of shame around that. What would you offer someone who's feeling that way right now?
Your past, it happened. It was a life decision that you made at that time, whether it was the decision to do your own trauma. You didn't have decision if the trauma was unmerited, but you made the decision after that trauma to not seek healing. So the bad choices that you've made in life, your trauma is a life choice, however you see that, but it does not have to be a life sentence. It doesn't have to be. If you don't get healing from it, I don't care how much you sweep it under the rug. I had a whole bunch of, unfortunately, this was a family member. So I had a whole bunch of uncomfortable Thanksgivings, Christmases. Will it happen again? And blessings for me, because I've now I am counseling people that have been through a trauma, and the trauma has happened multiple times. The blessing part of me that I now can see is being healed, it only happened once. But there were times that I was still left alone with the person that did it with it. And I was confused, like, even if you didn't know the full story, why would you leave me alone with them again? I just thank the Lord that it didn't happen. And that's all I can say. So, whatever happened in your past, unmerited, merited, bad choices led to horrible consequences, it wasn't a life sentence. We make it a life sentence by staying unhealed. See, we may not have had the choice in the trauma, but we have the choice into staying in that mindset of woe is me. Let's sweep this under the rug. You know what? I'm fine. You know what? It's weak if you cry. Man, I cried through that whole process from seven. I cried. So I rewatched the sermon this morning to prepare for this. I don't like watching that sermon, and it's not because it triggers what happened, it triggers why God allowed me to go through that. Looking at the people standing after the message. So God gave me this message in a dream. I woke up crying, and my wife was like, "Oh my God, what's going on? It's 3 in the morning." And at this point, my wife does know the full story because I'm in therapy. And so I tell her, God told me to tell my story. And she was like, mm. So, she, as a good wife, she's comforting me at 3 in the morning, morning breath at all. She's rubbing my back, 5 minutes of rubbing my back, because she's involved in this trauma. And as I said before, I made bad decisions in my marriage. I'll leave it at that. And she's like, "Are you sure that's what he told you to do?" And it was clear as day, gave me the format, gave me the scriptures. It was very little prep work for this sermon. And even as I tried to go see who's preached this before, I couldn't find it. There was no referencing of this moment. So God was like, well, not that it hasn't happened, I couldn't find it. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not that arrogant, but God was like, I want you to do it. So I did it. And what happened was I end up in that dream, I see hundreds of people coming down to get baptized. So if you guys go watch that tape, nobody got up. Everybody was just stunned. We have a church that we're really disciplined with, 30 to 35-minute messages. I went 10 minutes over. And I later found out somebody was like, I apologize for that. And somebody was like, I didn't even know it was 10 minutes over. So I didn't see, obviously I saw that vision wrong, but as soon as I finished and we went off the air, hundreds of people came down. I couldn't even go out and greet the people in our atrium. I just cried on the stage, and hundreds of people lined up and greeted me, telling me I went through the same thing. Men, I was molested by a prominent bishop. Women, I was raped over and over by this man. Other women, I was raped by my father, which I'll never understand. But just trauma after trauma after trauma, weeks and months after the sermon, even years after the sermon, one of the most powerful messages I've seen, courageous. You have help people, break the chains of their past trauma, whether they caused it or whether God allowed it. However it happened, we need to go through the healing process. So the fact that God used me, if you go watch the sermon, I cry all the way through the sermon. It's still at that moment of being able to tell thousands of people. also broke another chain. You know, uh, it got rid of, for me, the elephant in the room with, some decisions that I've made in the past, and I've just tried to move past it. And at that point, if people can't handle the bad decisions that I made during that time, which is well within their rights, that's understandable. But at the same time, that was all a part of my healing process. Your healing process may be to help your family. Your process may be just to help your spouse. Your healing process may not be for the world to see like mine was, but if it is, oh, what a joy it is to be used for the glory of God. And even though I cried as I watched it again, it's just fitting to know that that sermon is still helping other people. As I told Reverend Jocelyn, I don't see me preaching that again. It exists on YouTube. Go watch it. She had her own opinion about it, and that's her opinion. I have my opinion. But at the same time, if people are able to get healing from my experiences, my unmerited trauma, my bad choices, once I realized I was making um, bad decision, I was on a track to self destruct. It feels good to be healed now.
Amen, Pastor Drew. Yes.
It feels great. And I will say this, for those of you that have the memories of the trauma like it was yesterday, I no longer have those. They do not pop up in my head anymore. The only thing that pops up in my head now is the Lord has been with me this entire time, and He's still with me right now. So I don't have the memory of the body parts of what happened to me. I don't think about it. It does not impact me. I haven't had a moment like that in probably maybe 3 years. As I was going through the counseling process 4 and 5 years ago, well, 6 and 7 years ago, yeah, obviously I had those memories all the time. Every time I had to retell the story, I had it. But it's refreshing to know that God has allowed me to move on.
Amen, Pastor Drew. Thank you for being on the show today, sharing your testimony, being vulnerable, and giving people hope and encouraging them to do the work. I appreciate you, Pastor Drew, more than you know. And I encourage people to check out not only your sermon, which we're going to make sure we put in the show notes, but just watch Victory Apostolic online. They have amazing things that they're doing in the church. And so we'll make sure to include a link to their website. But again, Pastor Drew, thank you for being on the show with us today.
You're welcome. And before you get off, I just want to say this. Two things. The first thing is, to the people, do your future self a favor. Seek healing for your trauma now. It is worth every minute of it. If you're scared about what people think about you going to therapy, then don't tell them you're going to therapy. I'll be back. But I wouldn't worry about everybody else, because the thing about, once you go through therapy, everybody around you wins.
Facts. Facts.
Everyone around you wins. Even if they've been through trauma that they're still unresolved for, they still win from your healing. But I do want to say, Reverend Jocelyn came 2 weeks in a row and taught some amazing Bible classes on trauma. And I honestly feel like these should be part of the links. Uh, it actually what led to a lot of our conversation, which is what led to me being a guest on your show. So I do want to say, listen to hers also. Everybody needs healing. I don't care how old you are. In my opinion, if you've made it to the teenage years, you have experienced some type of trauma. And if you were born after 2021, COVID was your trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has some type of trauma, whether you think it's big or small. If it lies unresolved, it will be big eventually.
Facts. Go get help. Go get therapy. We got God, therapy, and what you saying, coffee? That's the t-shirt.
I had my cup this morning, God, therapy, and coffee, and then it says repeat. I started to wear that sweatshirt. And even now, so I'm not in constant therapy, but I do have a monthly touch base with my therapist. If something needs to be talked about, I bring it up. If something doesn't need to talk about, we talk for like 5 or 10 minutes, get caught up. How are the kids? How's everything? I was recently elevated or promoted to executive pastor. We talk about the issues that may come from that, and that's it. So I still have the monthly touch base. My wife is still involved in my healing process. Yesterday was a moment. I had a rough day at work yesterday, and very emotional for whatever. I'm not going to go into details because the people I work with may watch this. But either way, what I needed from her is to just be an ear for me when I get home, and then I'm done with it. Move on. Life happens. Did every meeting go how I wanted it to go? No, and God is still good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Pastor Drew.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Um, I hope this is a relationship that continues, and hopefully, we're able to have you back out to help with our congregants again, also.
Yeah, anytime, Pastor Drew, anytime. The work that we're doing and helping other people to heal, we're in it together. And so
Amen.
thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you for having me.
And I thank all of you for tuning in to another episode of Faith on the Journey. Oh, I'm so inspired, and I know you are too. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you know what to do. Please, first of all, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and share this with a friend. I guarantee you, someone you know has experienced something like this. Sadly, the statistics show that this is unfortunately something that happens more often than we realize. And so we do want people to experience freedom and healing, but it begins with acknowledging, exposing, and then doing the work around your healing. And so please be sure to share this. And if you are looking for a Christian counselor, be sure to consider us at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. So that's it for this week, family. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, you stay encouraged and you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you soon, family.